Crocodiles are making a comeback in Florida after years of hunting and habitat destruction.
For ages, the Everglades had two kings, the gator and the shy crocodile. That balance is totally gone now. Fishers started noticing huge, dark shapes tracking their boats. These weren't the timid locals people were used to.
American crocodiles are crawling back from the brink of extinction and thriving at, of all places.
These monsters were growing 28% faster than any other reptile in the water. They weren't just passing through, they were moving in and taking over. While everyone looked for pythons, a man-eater from the Nile was busy building an empire in the suburbs of Miami. It's not that simple, though, because these creatures are designed to hunt us. Night Watch in Homestead, March 8, 2012. Homestead, Florida, just south of Miami, on the edge of the Cheetah Drain, a patrol team spots a set of eyes reflecting in the beam of a halogen spotlight. In the biology of the Everglades, this is known as tapetum lucidum. It is the layer of tissue behind the retina that grants night vision. Usually, the color of that reflection tells you exactly what you are looking at. Alligators reflect red. Native American crocodiles reflect a softer yellow. But the separation between these eyes suggests a skull width that doesn't match the local census. The patrol moves in to tag what they assume is a large nuisance alligator. But as the boat drifts within 33 feet, the animal does something impossible. It doesn't submerge. It doesn't roll. It surges forward. It hits the mudbank and sprints, lifting its belly completely off the ground. It hits speeds of 9 miles per hour on land. By the time the rangers scramble onto the bank, the creature is gone. It disappeared into the sawgrass. They filed the report as an anomaly. It was a case of mistaken identity. But 4 years later, inside a sterile genetics lab at the University of Florida, a DNA sequencer would prove that the thing in the water that night was not a mistake. The tissue samples didn't match the American alligator. They didn't match the American crocodile. The sequence revealed a biological signature that belonged 7,000 miles away in the Okavango Delta of Botswana. We thought we were dealing with an invasive species. We were wrong. The genetic dating suggested that by the time we found them, the invasion had already been underway for a decade. To understand the gravity of this discovery, you first have to understand the rigid politics of the Florida Everglades. This is not just a swamp. It is a battlefield partitioned by millions of years of evolution. For the last epoch, the rule of law here has been enforced by two distinct kings. First, the American alligator. Dark, armored, and everywhere. They rule the freshwater sawgrass. They are the brutes of the swamp, with a bite force designed to crush turtle shells. Second is the American crocodile. These are the ghosts of the glades. They are strictly coastal creatures, evolved for the brackish water where the ocean meets the swamp. Despite their prehistoric appearance, the American crocodile is surprisingly timid. They are reclusive fish eaters. In the history of the United States, there has never been a confirmed human loss of life attributed to this species. They are shy, they are endangered, and they are incredibly fragile. Their population hangs by a thread, mostly clustered around the cooling canals of the Turkey Point nuclear power plant. The system worked because the boundaries were clear: gators in the freshwater and crocs in the saltwater. But in the mid-2000s, the swamp began to change. The usual ambient noise of the ecosystem shifted. Fishermen in the Silver Bluff Creek area began reporting a change in the apex hierarchy. The large, dominant American crocodiles, animals that had held basking spots for 20 years, suddenly vanished. They weren't gone. They were displaced. They had abandoned prime real estate. In biology, an apex predator only abandons its territory for two reasons: a collapse in the food source or the arrival of a superior predator. At the time, the scientific community had a convenient scapegoat: the Burmese python. This was the height of the python explosion. Giant constrictors were wiping out the mammal population, including raccoons, possums, and bobcats. When local residents reported seeing dark, aggressive lizards deep in the canals, biologists dismissed the claims. They assumed locals were misidentifying dark alligators or simply seeing pythons in the water. It was a classic case of cognitive bias. We saw what we expected to see. But the locals were insistent. They claimed these new reptiles didn't act like gators. They didn't bask passively. They tracked boats. They sat high in the water, watching. While the media focused on the war against the pythons, a second front had opened up in the water. A predator had slipped through the back door of the exotic pet trade, utilizing the python hysteria as camouflage. The first solid clue didn't come from a sighting, it came from the remains of others. Rangers began finding bodies of smaller reptiles that didn't fit the profile of a python attack. A python removes life by constriction. It causes heart failure through compression and leaves the skeleton intact. These bodies were sheared and torn apart with rotational velocity. It was the signature of a death roll. But the bite radius was too wide for a gator, and the aggression level was too high for an American croc. The biologists suspected a rogue alligator was to blame, but they were about to discover that the creature patrolling Silver Bluff Creek wasn't just a different species, it was a biological machine operating on a completely different metabolic setting, one that was growing 28% faster than anything else in the water. The presence of a faster hunter meant the old rules of the swamp were effectively over. The breakthrough didn't happen in the wild. It happened in 2009 when a field team managed to capture a juvenile crocodile in the canal system near Miami. It was small, barely a hatchling, but immediately the team at the University of Florida noticed something was wrong. In robotics, there's a concept called the uncanny valley, where something looks almost human, but small imperfections create a sense of unease. The same principle applies to biology. Dr. Kenneth Crisco, a manager at the Florida Museum of Natural History, examined the specimen. On the surface, it had the V-shaped snout of a crocodile, distinguishing it from an alligator, but the architecture was incorrect. The primary red flag was the dorsal armor. The back of a crocodile is covered in bony plates called scutes. Take a look at the Native American crocodile. Its scutes are irregular. They are scattered with wide spacing between the rows. It is an organic, chaotic pattern. But the specimen on the table was different. Its plates were perfectly aligned, rigid, geometric. There were no gaps. This wasn't just a different skin pattern, it was a different blueprint for armor. Then there was the temperament. Native American crocodiles are flighty. When captured, they often thrash once and then go still. It is a survival mechanism to save energy. This specimen didn't stop. It displayed a sustained high-octane aggression that bordered on the self-destructive. It didn't hiss, it emitted a low-frequency growl, a sound rarely heard in Florida waters. The team was baffled. Was this a mutation? A genetic deformity caused by the runoff from the nearby nuclear plant? Or perhaps something even rarer, a hybrid? Hybridization between alligators and crocodiles is biologically impossible because they are too far apart on the evolutionary tree. They split 80 million years ago. But hybridization between two crocodile species is possible. The working theory became that an American crocodile had somehow crossed with a Central American species, creating an animal with an unpredictable attitude. But theories are not data, and the data the team was about to collect would shatter the hybrid theory entirely. For 2 years, the team monitored the area. They needed more samples. In 2012 and 2014, they finally got them. They captured 3 more animals, but these weren't hatchlings anymore. They were subadults, and they were growing at a rate that defied the laws of the Everglades. Reptiles are cold-blooded, so their growth is limited by heat and food availability. In Florida, an American crocodile grows slowly, carefully saving energy in a competitive environment. But these new specimens were growing an estimated 28% faster than their native counterparts. In the wild, a 28% advantage isn't just a statistic, it is a landslide. It means you reach maturity faster. It means you reach the top size faster. It means you can eat the competition before they can eat you. The 2012 capture at Silver Bluff Creek confirmed the worst fears. The animal wasn't just fast in terms of growth, it was physically dominant. During the capture, the team witnessed the animal's reaction. When cornered, an animal croc swims away. This animal stood its ground on the canal bank, lifting its body high on its legs. This is a high walk posture that signals supreme confidence. The geometry was consistent. The geometric scutes and the short, broad snout were all there. So was the aggression. Dr. Crisco knew that visual identification wasn't enough to declare a state of emergency. He needed the genetic code. The team extracted tissue samples from the tail of the captured specimens. They packaged the vials and sent them to the sequencing lab. They were looking for a specific marker in the DNA. This gene acts as a biological passport. It doesn't just tell you what an animal is, it tells you exactly where its ancestors swam. The team expected the results to point to Central America, maybe Cuba or Jamaica. But when the sequencer finished its run in May of 2016, the coordinates it gave didn't point to the Caribbean. It pointed to a river system known for harboring the deadliest interactions between humans and wildlife on the planet. The machine had found a match that turned the Everglades into a high-risk zone. DNA of the Nile. The results were published in a major biology journal. The DNA samples from the Florida specimens were a 100% match for the Nile crocodile. This wasn't just a biological curiosity, it was a worst-case scenario. The American crocodile is a specialist fish eater. The Nile crocodile is a generalist that targets larger prey. It is responsible for an estimated 200 human losses of life every year in its native range. It views anything that enters the water not as a threat, but as biomass. But the scientists at the University of Florida found something even more specific buried in the DNA. Nile crocodiles are spread across 26 countries in Africa, but the Florida specimens didn't match the populations in Egypt or Uganda. Their genetic markers were identical to a specific group found in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. This was the smoking gun. Crocodiles don't swim 7,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, and they certainly don't navigate from South Africa to South Miami. The connection confirmed that the cause was human. Sometime in the late 1990s, a collector imported specimens from this specific South African lineage. They brought them into Florida, likely illegally or with forged permits, and then, when the animals grew from cute 10-inch hatchlings into 6-foot monsters, they did what reckless owners always do. They opened the cage door. But the species identification was only the first half of the horror. The second half was the timeline. Recall the specimens. In 2009, they caught a hatchling. In 2012, they caught a subadult. In 2014, another subadult. Genetic analysis confirmed that these animals were related. They were siblings. This implies the existence of a reproductive pair, a mother and a father, living freely in the Everglades. To produce a hatchling in 2009, the parents had to be mature. Nile crocodiles take about 10 to 12 years to reach that stage. This means the original breeding pair has likely been in the swamp since roughly 1998 or 2000. For nearly 15 years, two massive African apex predators were living, hunting, and breeding in the Florida suburbs, completely undetected. They survived the hurricanes, they survived the cold snaps, they even survived the python explosion. We managed to catch their children. The 2012 and 2014 captures were removed from the wild, but here is the question that keeps biologists awake at night. We found the children, but we never found the parents. The adults who started this colony, the ones big enough to survive 15 years in the wild, are statistically likely to still be out there. And if they aren't just surviving, they are waiting. The immediate threat is the Nile crocodile itself, but the long-term nightmare is something far more complex. It is a biological concept known as hybrid vigor. The American crocodile and the Nile crocodile are different species, but they are close enough to mate. In fact, in captivity, we have seen related species cross to create offspring that are often larger, stronger, and more aggressive than either parent. Currently, the Native American crocodile is trapped by temperature. It is tropical. If it swims too far north, past West Palm Beach, the winter cold snaps will end its life. It is biologically fenced into the southern tip of the state. But the Nile crocodile is different. In Africa, it thrives in many climates, from the scorching heat of the equator to the cooler waters of the southern Cape. It is robust. If the invasive Nile crocodiles manage to mate with the native population, the resulting hybrid could inherit the Nile's aggression and the Americans' local adaptations. We would be facing a predator capable of expanding its range much further north, hiding in plain sight. Since the 2016 confirmation, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has operated under a strict policy for Nile crocodiles that can only be described as a mandate for total eradication. The official stance is one of absolute removal, a clinical and confident directive issued from air-conditioned offices in Tallahassee. But as one moves away from the polished mahogany desks and into the humid, heavy air of the southern peninsula, we must ask ourselves the difficult, perhaps even haunting question: is that even possible? The Everglades is not merely a wetland or a park, it is one of the most hostile and impenetrable terrains on the face of the earth. It is 1.5 million acres of flooded sawgrass, labyrinthine mangrove tunnels, and obsidian black water that refuses to give up its secrets. This is a landscape that defies human intervention at every turn. It is a place where a huge jetliner crashed in 1972, striking the earth with such force and disappearing into the muck so rapidly that the swamp swallowed entire sections of the wreckage. Some pieces of that metal carcass were never seen again, despite the full weight of federal recovery efforts. If a 100-ton machine of aluminum and steel can vanish into this grass, then hiding a breeding population of apex predators is not just possible, it is effortless. The history of our encounters with these invaders is a series of red flags that we have consistently tried to paint as isolated incidents. We caught the 2009 hatchling, a tiny snapping remnant of a lineage that shouldn't exist here. We caught the 2012 subadult, a larger, more confident animal that had survived 3 Florida winters. We caught the 2014 sibling, further proving that these were not just random escapes, but a family tree taking root in the limestone and marl. We have removed every physical piece of evidence we have found, dragging them out of the water to be measured, necropsied, and filed away in reports. But science does not rely on what we have in our hands. It relies on what the data suggests is still in the water. The data tells us that for every one we catch, statistical probability suggests others remain hidden in the shadows. The math of invasive species is a cruel one. For every visible individual, there are dozens, perhaps hundreds that remain unseen. Most chilling of all is the fact that the parents, the original breeding pair from the year 2000, were never found. They are the ghosts of the glades. They might have passed from old age, their bones sinking into the peat to be dissolved by the acidic water. Or perhaps they are still out there. They could be massive and ancient now, 15 feet of prehistoric muscle and leather, submerged just inches below the surface, watching the airboats pass by with golden, unblinking eyes. The complexity of the situation goes far beyond a simple game of hide and seek. It is not that simple because the Everglades is not a static environment. It is a living, breathing, and rapidly changing organism. The hydrology of South Florida is in a state of constant flux, with water getting saltier in some reaches due to rising sea levels and fresher in others due to man-made restoration projects. While these shifts are intended to save the ecosystem, they are inadvertently providing more corridors for these animals to move deeper into the interior. What most people, even those who live on the edge of the wilderness, don't realize is that these predators don't need a massive, pristine river to survive and thrive. They are the ultimate opportunists of the animal kingdom. A suburban drainage canal behind a sprawling housing development, a golf course pond, or a roadside ditch is more than enough habitat for a Nile crocodile. They are masters of the low-profile existence. They can hide in a concrete culvert pipe for weeks, invisible to the families living just yards away. They can go months without a large meal, their metabolism slowing to a crawl until the perfect opportunity presents itself. And they are smart. This is the factor that truly separates the Nile crocodile from the American alligator or even the American crocodile. They are known in their native Africa for their cognitive depth. They learn the patterns of the people around them. They watch, they calculate, they notice the consistency of the dog walkers who stroll along the canal banks at sunset. They watch the children playing near the edge of the water, unaware that the ripple they see near the reeds isn't a turtle or a log. Basically, we have introduced a predator into the American South that understands on an evolutionary level how to hunt in a human-dominated landscape. They have spent millennia living alongside human settlements in the Nile Basin, and they have brought that terrifying expertise to the suburbs of Miami and Homestead. The truly crazy part of this unfolding disaster is that we spent all our money, all our political capital, and all our scientific resources fighting the pythons while this silent takeover was happening in the background. The Burmese python is a catastrophe, certainly, but it is a slow-moving one that affects the food chain from the bottom up. We were so distracted by the snake in the grass that we ignored the dragon in the water. Hands down, the Nile crocodile is a more direct and visceral threat to human safety than any snake could ever be. A snake might swallow a fawn or a wading bird, but a Nile crocodile is a man-eater by trade. Snakes are a problem for the ecosystem, a tragedy for biodiversity, but these crocodiles are a problem for us, for our children, and for our sense of safety in our own backyards. They represent a different category of danger entirely. The king of the Nile has claimed a new kingdom in the New World, and he has found it to be a land of plenty. In this new kingdom, the rules of the game have shifted overnight. We are no longer the tourists peering through binoculars from the safety of a boardwalk. We are no longer the masters of the terrain. In the eyes of a Nile crocodile, we have been demoted. We are the prey. We used to worry about the snakes, spending millions on bounties and infrared cameras to find serpents that are essentially shy and reclusive. But while we were looking down at the pythons, something else was looking up at us from the murky depths. This predator doesn't hide because it is afraid. It is hunting. It is time to stop thinking of the Everglades as a managed park or a protected scenic vista. We must start thinking of it as a territory that has been reclaimed by a master hunter that has survived 5 mass extinctions. Could a secret population of man-eaters be living in your neighborhood canals right now without anyone knowing? This discovery changes everything about Florida's safety. Make sure to like and subscribe.